When I was younger, people used to say I had some sort of strange connection to the paranormal. I don't know if they were joking, trying to scare me, or genuinely believed it, but over the years, I've heard stories about myself that I can't quite explain. These stories usually come from my mom, who swears up and down that some eerie things happened when I was little. One of the earliest stories she told me was from when I was about 4 years old. She said I was sitting in the living room playing quietly by myself. Nothing unusual about that, right? But when she walked in, she found me crying, tears streaming down my little face, my hand trembling as I pointed to the window. Naturally, she panicked and rushed over to see what had scared me, but when she looked out, there was nothing there. The street was empty, the yard completely still. She knelt down and asked, "What's wrong, sweetie? What did you see?" Apparently, I looked her straight in the eye and said, "Mama, I saw a man in the window." When she asked me to describe him, I told her he was pale, very tall, and had sharp, pointy features. My mom always adds here that a chill ran down her spine when I said that. She didn't waste a second. She scooped me up, grabbed her car keys, and we drove off. I don't remember any of this, not even a little bit. But my mom insists it happened, and the way she tells it, I can tell it still unnerves her. But there is something I do remember, and it's just as strange. I was about 6 years old, spending time at my late Grammy's house. I loved her house. It always felt warm and inviting, even if it had a few creaky floorboards and dimly lit hallways that could seem spooky to a kid. That day, I was in Grammy's bedroom, playing with this girl I'd met. She was about my age, maybe a little older, and wore a dress that reminded me of something my aunt would wear. It wasn't a particularly unusual moment, at least not to me. We were just playing, giggling, and talking about kid stuff. At some point, my Grammy came to find me. She stood in the doorway of her room, looking puzzled. "Who are you talking to, honey?" she asked. I pointed to the girl beside me and said, "I'm playing with this girl. She's wearing something like Auntie wears." Grammy froze. My aunt, who was also at the house that day, came to see what was going on. When I described the girl and her clothes, my aunt leaned in and said quietly, "Ask her where her grandma is." I turned to the girl and relayed the question. Her answer made me stop in my tracks. "My grandma's dead," she said simply. I told my aunt, and she didn't miss a beat. "Tell her to go to her grandma in heaven." So I turned back to the girl and repeated my aunt's words. The girl didn't say anything after that. She just looked at me, then at something far behind me, like she was seeing something I couldn't. She started walking, her steps soft and deliberate, as if she were climbing an invisible staircase. And then, this part I'll never forget, she disappeared into a glowing light that seemed to come out of nowhere. I don't know who that girl was. I don't remember her face or recognize her as anyone I knew in real life. To this day, I can't tell if that was a dream, a figment of my imagination, or something else entirely. But the weirdness doesn't stop there. My mom told me another story about her younger sister. Let's call her Aunt N. This one gives me chills every time. When Aunt N was around 4 years old, my grandparents found her sitting in the corner of a room, staring at the wall. She was rocking back and forth, muttering something under her breath. At first, they thought she was playing some sort of game or talking to herself, like kids do. But as they got closer, they realized she wasn't speaking in English. She was mumbling in Portuguese. Now, this might not sound too strange if you come from a family where people speak Portuguese. But here's the thing. Nobody on my mom's side of the family knows Portuguese. Not a single person. My grandparents were terrified. They called out to her, but she didn't respond. When they gently turned her around, they saw that her eyes were closed. She was asleep. Even after waking her up, she didn't remember anything about it. She had no idea what she'd been saying, or why she was even in the corner to begin with. I don't know what to make of all these stories. Maybe they're just weird coincidences. Maybe they're the kind of memories that get twisted and exaggerated over time. Or maybe, just maybe, there's something more to them. Every so often, I catch myself wondering, what if it's true? What if I really do have some strange connection to the paranormal? The thought both fascinates and terrifies me. Hi, my name is Mike. I'm 24 now, But this story takes me back to when my family and I lived in a quiet, unassuming neighborhood in a Tier 3 city. It was the kind of place where people mostly kept to themselves, but whispers of superstition and the paranormal were never far from the surface. What makes this story so unsettling is how real it felt, how close it hit to home, literally. It all began with the tragic death of a woman in our neighborhood. She had lived in the house right next to ours, and her passing was shrouded in mystery. No one really talked about what had happened, but the rumors spread quickly. Her spirit hadn't moved on. People claimed she still lingered in the home she'd once lived in, as if she couldn't let go. Unfortunately for us, my family moved into the house next door. At first, life went on as usual. We unpacked, settled in, and tried to ignore the eerie stories the neighbors whispered. My parents weren't the superstitious type, and I tried to brush off the sense of unease that crept in whenever I passed by the woman's old house. But ignoring something doesn't make it disappear. The first signs that something was wrong were small, almost easy to dismiss. But they grew into a series of incidents that none of us could explain. Incident 1, the knocks at the door. One evening, my brother and I were home alone. We had left our parents at a neighbor's house and were playing a game to pass the time. Everything was perfectly normal until we heard a knock at the door. It wasn't a light tap or a hesitant knock. It was firm, deliberate. The kind of knock that makes you think someone really needs to speak to you. I ran to the door and opened it, expecting to see a neighbor or maybe even a delivery person. But there was no one there. I remember standing in the doorway, peering into the empty street. The air felt heavy, like the world was holding its breath. I told myself it was just a prank, closed the door, and went back inside. But it kept happening. Week after week, the knocking would return. Each time, I'd open the door to find no one there. It started to feel like whatever was out there wasn't just playing games, it wanted something. Incident 2, the paralyzing view. From my uncle's room, you could see the woman's old house clearly. It stood there, quiet and empty, with an almost ominous presence. My aunt, who often spent time in that room, started to complain about a strange feeling whenever she looked out the window. "It's like I can't move," she told us once. "I feel frozen, like something is holding me in place." She wasn't the only one. Over time, other family members reported the same sensation, a creeping paralysis that always seemed to come when they were near that window. It was as if the house itself was watching, waiting. Incident 3, sleepwalking. Before we moved into that house, I'd never had any issues with sleepwalking. But not long after we settled in, strange things started happening. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, completely unaware of what I was doing, and wander into my uncle's room. Sometimes, I'd knock on his door before falling back asleep right there in the hallway. My family was understandably worried. I had no memory of these episodes, but they became frequent enough to unsettle everyone in the house. It wasn't just the sleepwalking, it was the timing. It always seemed to happen on nights when the air felt heavy, when the house felt different. Incident 4, the laughing woman. This was the incident that shook us all to our core. One night, our extended family gathered at our house for a small party. Since there wasn't enough space inside, some of us decided to sleep on the terrace. It was a warm, peaceful evening, and we thought the fresh air would help us relax. But my uncle couldn't sleep. As he lay there, he began to hear faint laughter coming from the staircase. At first, he thought it was one of us playing a prank. But when he looked toward the stairs, his heart stopped. A figure was standing there. It was the woman. Pale and smiling, her laughter echoing softly in the night. My uncle, who is usually the bravest person I know, felt frozen in place. She was looking directly at him, her laughter growing louder. Summoning every ounce of courage, he got up and walked toward the stairs. But as he descended, the figure disappeared. The laughter, however, didn't stop. It seemed to follow him, growing fainter as he reached the bottom. He ran to wake up my grandmother, and the rest of us quickly moved inside. No one could sleep after that. The next morning, my uncle told us what he had seen. The way he described her, the smile, the laughter, sent chills down my spine. None of us could shake the feeling that we weren't alone in that house. Incident 5, the son's rituals. The woman who had passed away had 2 children, a son and a daughter. Her son would visit the house every Sunday, and what he did there only added to the eerie atmosphere. He would sit outside the house, singing softly to himself. Sometimes he'd talk as if his mother were still there, responding to someone none of us could see. The neighbors whispered about him, calling him disturbed. But to me, he just seemed lost. There was a deep sadness in his voice, a longing that I couldn't quite understand. It was as if he believed that by singing and speaking to her, he could keep her spirit alive. Maybe he was right. We eventually moved out of that house, and I can't say I was sad to leave. The memories of those incidents still linger, though, like shadows that refuse to fade. Sometimes I wonder if the woman's spirit really was there, unable to let go of the life she left behind. Or maybe it was the collective fear and superstition of the neighborhood that brought those experiences to life. Whatever the truth is, I know one thing for sure. I'll never forget that house. If you're curious, I could give you the address. But be warned, you might not like what you find. Let me start by saying, the title might be misleading. He wasn't really my father. He never acted like one, never did the things a father should do. But he left behind the kind of scars only a father could inflict. I have to be careful with names and details here, to protect my family's privacy. Some parts are vague, and not just for anonymity. I wish I didn't know them myself. My father died when I was 13. By then, he had already lost all parental rights. It happened after he went to prison for trying to kill one of us. It's horrifying to even type that, but it's the truth. For most of my life, I thought I was the youngest of 4. But as we grew older, we learned the truth. There was another sibling, an older brother we'd never known, and later a younger sister. Secrets and chaos were my father's specialty. We all carry his memory differently. Derek, the eldest, bore the brunt of his physical abuse. For years, he hated our father with every fiber of his being. But our father was a master manipulator. Before he died, he somehow convinced Derek that he'd changed, that he was the dad he always wanted, so long as Derek never disagreed or said no to him. My sister, on the other hand, has this strange, almost defiant affection for him. She clings to the idea that forgiving him makes her better than the rest of us, like holding on to her love for him proves something. Then there's Jacob and me. We see him for what he was. When he died, we didn't grieve. To us, it felt like a storm had finally passed. We thought that was the end of it. But a few months ago, something strange started happening, something none of us were ready for. It began with Harper. Harper, my youngest niece, has always been fragile. Born premature, she's constantly battling some illness or another. I went over one evening to babysit while my sister attended a parent-teacher conference, and her brother Jace was at work. It was supposed to be a quiet night. I tucked Harper into bed, told her a story, and went downstairs to grab some dinner. That's when I heard it, a blood-curdling scream from upstairs. I ran to her room, heart pounding, and found her sitting up in bed, sobbing uncontrollably. The room was a mess, like something or someone had ransacked it. Between hiccuped sobs, she kept saying, "The Shaggy Man! He's at the window! He won't go away!" I froze. Her words sent a chill down my spine, but I tried to stay calm. I told myself it was probably just a bad dream, or maybe a neighborhood creep peeking through the window. After calming her down, I texted Jacob. We weren't taking chances. While Harper slept, Jacob and I did a full sweep of the house. One of his friends checked the yard. We found nothing, no footprints, no signs of anyone lurking. We were ready to chalk it up to her imagination when she screamed again. This time, we were prepared. We burst into her room and found the window wide open. Harper was huddled in her bed, crying and clawing at her blankets like she was trying to escape something invisible. Jacob scooped her up, and I stepped toward the window. I peered into the darkness, straining my eyes for any sign of movement. But there was nothing, just the still night air. Once Harper calmed down, Jacob asked her to describe the Shaggy Man. Her description was simple but chilling. He's tall and hairy, his face is messy, and he keeps staring at me. Her words sent a jolt through me. I pulled out an old photo of our father, a disheveled, scruffy man with wild eyes. I hesitated but showed it to her. "Is this the man you saw?" Her face went pale. She nodded. "That's him. That's the Shaggy Man." We brought her downstairs to sleep on the couch. When my sister got home, we told her what happened. but instead of concern or disbelief, she seemed annoyed. She brushed it off like it was nothing. "That's just your grandpa," she said, her tone casual. "He's watching over her. He'd never hurt her." Jacob and I exchanged a look. "That's not true," I said, my voice shaking. "You know exactly what he was capable of." The argument that followed was heated. My sister refused to believe this could be anything but harmless. She saw it as some kind of comforting family connection, while Jacob and I saw it for what it was, a nightmare. I don't know what to believe. Is Harper really seeing a ghost, or has she overheard stories about our father and turned them into terrifying dreams? Either way, we can't ignore it. If it's just her imagination, how do we ease her fears? And if it's something more, something paranormal, how do we protect her? Do we bring in a priest? Burn sage? Or do we confront the possibility that some spirits just won't let go? Whatever the truth is, one thing is certain. My father's shadow still looms over us, long after his death. And Harper, innocent and fragile, has been caught in its grasp. I don't know how to fix this, but I know one thing. I won't let him hurt her. Not in life, not in death.